All right, so now it's live. So let me share the links on Twitter again, just to make sure, because it still says 0 viewers, so we're good for now.
Okay. No one is watching. Is there anywhere we can look at this? Like look at the Hangout as it's happening?
Yes, it's on the Hangout page, event page.
Okay.
So.
So you'll know when you have viewers, I guess?
Yeah, it should tell me. Because it'll know whenever someone's playing the video. It was weird. Yesterday, whenever we were doing that test, it did show one. Oh, there we go. We got someone going. So, all right. So we're gonna wait a couple minutes. Probably start about 5:03, maybe 5:05, to give people time to jump on. So, how's everything going? Over there, it's dark over there. We got the light here still in California.
Yeah, it's 8:05 or 8:03 here. Things I think are going pretty well. Cam, weigh in here.
We're cranking away. You know, Gordon is right on the other side of the table for me here. You know, he's logging clips right now for the opening of the film, and I've been cutting the pre-build for one of the visual effects, and that actually went out to Ryan this morning. So he's hopefully doing his thing over there. I need to check in with him when we're done here. And you know, we're cutting away, so making some progress and finally actually picking up some steam. So
good.
All right. Nice. Okay, and just a quick little mention: if you guys can hardwire in at all, it might help your speed be a little bit faster.
Yeah, I did that.
If you're not on Wi-Fi, so just a last-minute notice. So, all right. Well, it's 5:03.
I'm actually running on the
might as well go ahead and get started. Okay.
That's
all right. So, if you guys want to introduce yourself and about the film and what your role is on the creative team.
Sure, I can start. My name's Mike Woldridge. I'm the writer and one of the producers of War for the Web. A brief overview of the film. You know, we think of the internet as this sort of magical, mystical place where things happen and we can access it anytime we want to. But the fact of the matter is, it's a hard physical infrastructure. It's an expensive physical infrastructure. The infrastructure is privately owned and operated, and that has serious consequences for how we can use the internet. In addition to that, there are sort of all of these discussions happening right now of, you know, privacy, free speech. All of these things are happening. All these conversations are going on, and they're kind of going on behind closed doors. So the goal of this film is to illustrate that the internet is a physical thing, and that these conversations that we all as internet users need to be a part of are happening kind of as we speak. And if we don't weigh in, we're going to miss our opportunity to have a say in the future of the internet.
Okay. All right.
I'm Cameron Bruckner. I'm the director and one of the producers on the film. And you know, as Michael said, you know, we sort of started with the infrastructure and the ownership of, you know, how we get our internet. I think that one of the things that sort of as this process has developed for us has become, you know, something that really stands out to me is, you know, there are a bunch of different issues that are sort of, you know, they're being discussed behind closed doors, so to speak, or you know, they're sort of beginning to become a little bit more popular now, or more publicized. But the thing that I find particularly interesting is a lot of people get sort of bogged down in one issue or another, and really what's fascinating is how all those issues are interconnected. Every one of them relates to every other one of them, so you really sort of have to take a more umbrella look, so to speak, at all of those things at once. And that's sort of one of the goals that we're trying to accomplish that I find particularly interesting.
Definitely. Awesome.
And I guess finally, I'm Ben Caspi, and I'm another producer on War for the Web.
You don't have anything to add to the end of that?
I think those guys. I think Michael and Cameron handled it pretty well.
Yeah. All right, and Michael, if you want to start out by addressing, what prompted you to start the beginning of this film and to really start developing everything in your life.
Sure. So we got rolling on this film 3 years ago.
Almost 3 years ago, Michael.
Almost 3 years ago, which is a little nuts. The real inciting incident for me was twofold. First, there was this really cool article by a guy named Andrew Blum in Wired magazine about the journey of a bit across America, and he took these really gorgeous. It was a photo essay, and there were pictures of places like Telex at 60 Hudson Street in New York City, and Ashburn, Virginia, and San Luis Obispo, where literally there are cables connecting to wires that connect to your computer at home. So it was this sort of eye-opening moment for me of oh wait, there's a physical thing here that has to happen before we can send an email or tweet or Facebook or chat with anybody. And so that was really fascinating. And then that same month that I read that, I was actually chatting with my dad, who works in Silicon Valley. He works for Oracle, and he mentioned that at the beginning of 2008, in January 2008, they'd had this massive incident where they hadn't been able to get in touch with any of their colleagues in India for about 2 days. And Oracle's a pretty big multinational corporation. They have a lot of employees in India, and they basically a series of cables had been cut in the Suez Canal, not nefariously, just sort of by accident. And as a result, something like 70% of traffic between the U.S. and the Middle East just disappeared and didn't have anywhere else to go. And so that was the moment for me. Those two moments were the ones that kind of were well, wait a minute. There's something more to this than just signing on and being there.
Yeah. So with the internet, we think of it as being this cloud because they use that so often, but it's actually a physical thing.
Yeah, it's made up of cables and wires and servers and routers, and I mean literally thousands of them. There are cables that run under the ocean between continents. Every internet-connected gas and drilling platform, overseas or in the Caribbean, is connected by a physical cable to land. I think people are kind of under the impression that it's satellite or that it's wireless, but satellite doesn't really work for internet very well. It's certainly an option, but people don't use it because the latency is so long. It takes a quarter of a second to do anything, which is a long time in internet terms. And then wireless, we think of wireless like our phones and mobile, but ultimately that's all only wireless until it gets to the nearest cell phone tower, and then it's usually hardwired into the internet as a whole. So I think there's a real there's a real kind of lack of understanding about that, and then that coupled with the fact that all of this infrastructure is expensive to both install and maintain, and requires a really big financial commitment and a really big investment and an ongoing investment by the companies who provide us with internet, and that those companies are all private and that they have a lot of say in how we use the internet. It's not just sort of a fair game, open place. It's really a place governed by private contracts and rules, and not knowing those rules seems risky.
All right, and so from that, what prompted you to reach out to the other guys here on the team and start developing this film?
Yeah, well, I pitched it to a couple people at the time as sort of this I think when I originally pitched it around, I was saying, let's make an art film about the infrastructure of the internet, which is obviously not what we've ended up doing, but I think for the better. But yeah, so I mean, I pitched it to a group of kids at NYU, and I pitched it to a couple other people, and I pitched it to Cameron, And Cameron was the one, Cameron and I were working together at the time. We worked at a post-production facility called Do Art Film and Video, which was actually like the last independently owned lab in New York City. We were still developing film in 2008. Who knew? And
2009.
2009. Fine, they closed in 2009. But so I chatted with him about it one day. I think we were in his edit room, and he was really into it, and he was sort of the first one to really respond to it and say, I think we can do this with me, and as such, we jumped off, and then he brought Ben in later on.
We were actually in the dailies room at Duart. What really sort of was sort of a catching moment for us was, I think it was actually during the period of time where a gas main had blown on 53rd Street, and we were on 55th, and we had no internet. And my edit suite was behind the shaftway, under the stairs that led to a mezzanine that had all these tape decks and stuff on it. So there was absolutely no cell phone service there. And when we lost the internet, in order for me to do anything, check my email, just know what was going on elsewhere in the building, I had to walk out front to get cell phone service, and and leave the building, like actually physically get outside. And we all sort of don't realize how dependent we are on the network until we don't have access to it. And I guess it was during that, during that.
Oh,
He'll be back.
yeah, he'll be back. Well, we lost him just a bit. Did you want to add anything onto that, Ben, what he was saying?
I mean,
3 or 4 days that we didn't have the internet, that Michael mentioned to me. Am I back?
Yeah, you cut off for
It looks like Google muted me because they thought I was typing. At any rate, so Michael mentioned it to me, and it was fascinating to me that we didn't know how this thing worked.
Okay.
So I guess that's a few months. I think Michael and Cameron have been working on it for a few months, putting together a developing the idea, developing the project, and late one night, and I was on the West Coast at this time, so it must have been even later for Cameron. I got a call from Cameron and he dropped the word net neutrality in my direction, saying, go and take a look into it and see what you think. So I started looking into it, and found worked my way into internet policy, and the idea that there are it's an unchecked sort of Wild West out there, and that governments are trying to figure out who should have control and who should have access and what can they have access to, as well as corporations are doing the same thing. And so Cameron and I had met at USC Film School, and had looked for a project to work on. We worked on projects during film school, and this seemed like a good opportunity for us to come back together and work on a project that seemed really, really interesting and really timely for us.
Okay. All right. Well, what you mentioned kind of brings us into all the recent stuff going on in the news with the NSA and Snowden and PRISM and the government's ability to collect the information that we share online. So, what were you guys at all surprised by that? And what's your opinion on Google and them releasing their statement?
I think the first thing that's going back into internet history is interesting is that the internet was never built to be secure or private. It was built to be an open forum to exchange ideas between research institutions. And so, anytime you send something on the internet, multiple copies are made along the way from the sender to the recipient. So I think that sort of, will gets us into the idea of, are people able to access, your information online?
Okay, so literally, whenever you send an email, it isn't just going from point A to point B.
Yeah,
there's actually a funny app. There's an app that you can get for your phone that I was playing with that you can look at any network either from a global perspective or from sort of a top-down structural method, and see how many points of connection it takes for you to reach any other network around the world. And for the most part, the vast majority of the available networks, it's something like 17 points of connection, which means it has to go through that many different other networks to get you from your network to their network. So depending on how many points of connection there are, that's how many organizations, companies, corporations, whatever, that have access to the data that transfers across those lines. And if every one of them has the opportunity or the ability or the incentive to make a copy, they can all do that, which means when you send an email, the possibility or the probability that there are more copies out there than simply the one on your system and the one on the receiving end system is very high. And the value of that data is very, very difficult to put a number on, because it's all about how you can monetize information, and that can be done in a variety of different ways. And I'm very, very confident we haven't seen the end of that path yet.
Okay.
I would say too that it was the kind of thing that I think when we first looked into this was like we found a little surprising, but then as you just get familiar with any of the policy or lack of policy that surrounds the internet, you realize really quickly that there's nothing, most of the rules, most of the laws that govern the internet were written in the 1980s, give or take, with the exception of the DMCA, which was written in the 90s, and that ultimately the regulatory body that the internet falls under is one that does not provide very much in the way of privacy or security for communication, despite what your average user may kind of assume. And it's one that this brings up is just a funny thing. I always laugh because at the end of almost any email from any business, you get this like, if you are not the intended recipient, please treat this as whatever, and like this email is confidential communication between. That's not true. It's just not true. And saying it doesn't make it true, and it just cracks me up every time. And my fiance is an attorney, and it's at the bottom of all her emails. And like if any of her clients wanted to, any of her opposition wanted to subpoena that, it wouldn't be that hard. They could try and get it from their email provider. If that's an on-site thing, then there are a couple other places they can go for it. And all it would take is a subpoena. It doesn't even take a court order or anything like that. So it's a pretty open space that way, and always has been.
Okay, so there's a lot of new discussion happening around this since that. So from all three of you, what are your opinions on what need to happen, and what is the goal of the film to get some action to take place?
Well, I think those are two questions, and we should make sure we answer them distinctly. As far as the goal of the film, I think we've said all along, and I stick by. We certainly have our opinions, but ultimately, this is just a conversation that needs to happen in public, and is not happening in public because people aren't informed. And so the goal of the film is to demonstrate, to illustrate that this is a physical entity, and to couple that with look, these are all the conversations that are happening. Here's some information about each of them. You need to decide which one is important to you, but if you don't decide and try to weigh in, you're not going to get an opportunity to. I think the goal of the film is also to be entertaining and to be provocative and compelling, but ultimately we want to make sure people walk away with an understanding of where they can find out more about these policy debates and where they can weigh in. In terms of the first question, which was what do we think needs to happen? I mean, from my perspective, I think the simplest thing, and this is going to be kind of a technical answer, is when the internet was first invented, it fell under Title II, I think, right, guys? Title II of the Telecommunications, the FCC Telecommunications Act, and was a telecommunications service. And when that happened, there were a lot of consumer protections that went along with that. In 2001, between 2001 and 2005, it was changed to a Title I, an information service, Title I classification. And when that happened, those consumer protections basically disappeared. And so, undoing that change and addressing the policy concerns that come with it will go a long way, I think, to solving at least addressing some of the privacy concerns, some of the confidentiality concerns. It doesn't fix the other issues, but it's one way to get at those. Guys, if you want to.
I think that one of the things the internet has shown us in the very brief, and don't kid yourself, it has been a very brief period of time that it has been commercially available, is that when there are a lot of people that have a voice, when a lot of people get involved in an issue, change can happen quickly, and we can solve problems together very quickly. And really what, for me, I always come back to is that the very end value of our ability to communicate is not what it offers us today, it's what it offers us tomorrow. There's a variety of ways where we see innovation and creativity is facilitated by our ability to interconnect. And what that does is offers us an opportunity to create new services, new products, whatever down the line. In order for us to do that effectively, we need to understand, how it works. We need to be, able to interact with the applications. And, the term that I always come back to is digital literacy. And it's really very important that, as we move forward in a more connected world, that people are, digitally literate, and that we know, how things work, how it's run, how it operates, and how we can make the most out of those opportunities. And for me, both in terms of what I think needs to happen, regardless of any of the policy, Title I, Title II, whatever, what really needs to happen, and what I hope the film accomplishes, is that it gets more people involved in the conversation, raises the level of discourse, and gets more people to be literate about how it works and what the costs are of not having connectivity.
Yeah, I think a lot of what's out there right now, whether they be news articles or web videos or whatnot, that try to tackle this issue, whether it be a lot of there was a hot key term that I talked about earlier that it's like net neutrality, or privacy or security. A lot of them sort of piecemeal the internet. And Cameron touched on this earlier. The way we've sort of approached this is all those issues that we're talking about, whether it be competition in the marketplace or any of the other ones, all comes down to the infrastructure. And the infrastructure is sort of the through line, which is, it's great to talk about, we want to have access to every website, but those are just applications that run on the internet. It's what's really important that we feel is understanding what the physical infrastructure is, how it works, and really how that plays into all these other issues that people are talking about today.
Okay, great. And so going back to the film, you guys have obviously learned so much about the internet and all of this that you didn't know whenever you started it. So what have been some of the most interesting things that you've learned or that's happened during production or pre-production or even now in post-production?
I'm going to actually jump in on that one first right away. I had the opportunity a couple weeks ago to go to a manufacturing facility where they make undersea cables, and I'm sure that for people who see it every day, for everybody out there, that it's run of the mill, so to speak. But honestly, getting to see the how a tiny piece of glass can be, or a thin, narrow piece of glass is, enshrouded in these, yay big, cables that are armored with, steel and have copper that run through them for the power, and how that gets built was an utterly fascinating thing to see. And the footage that we have is great, and I'm very much so looking forward to sharing that with everybody else out there. So.
I think the thing that surprised me the most, and also I think scared me the most, was our interview with Richard Clark when he informed us that every single Fortune 500 company has already been hacked. Just gives you the impression that it's as I said before, the internet was not built to be secure. It was built to be open, and we try to treat it in a different way than in the manner than it was intended to, and then we try to understand why. Well, the reason was it's meant to exchange information. So.
I think for me, this whole thing has been an education about tech policy, about telecom policy, and I would say just the sheer number of people that the thing that's been the most exciting to me is just the sheer number of people who are really enthusiastic and really interested in this policy. Not just, not in terms necessarily of our audience, but just the people who work on this every day. Folks who provide telecom services, who build wireless towers, who connect cities. These are people that are doing this day in and day out, and it's fascinating to them, and that's why they're there. And so it's really cool to interact with them and to ask them about it because they love to talk about it. They love to talk about their business. They love to talk about what they've been doing and the services that they've been providing and how excited they are to be offering new, faster services often to their customers. And it's been really cool to see that, the internet, despite kind of the, I think, there are sort of two things. The first is that, the majority of the internet in the United States is provided by a couple big companies. And it can be easy to think that that makes it sort of monolithic and boring, but there's a lot of stuff happening at the edges. In most big cities, there are a ton of options for businesses, at least, for enterprise solutions. And there are, even in rural areas, there are things like, wireless area networks and stuff that, and all these people are there because they think the internet's really important and really fascinating. And so it's cool it's been really great to get to talk to those people about why they're there, what they're excited about, what they do, and how they do it.
So
we
you
have
guys,
some funny stories too, if anybody's.
Yeah, well, one of the questions that I definitely wanted to know is in terms of the whole Comcast, AT&T, the duopoly. I know you guys addressed that in the film. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, it has kind of to do with what you just addressed.
Yeah, I think the upshot is that in most regions of the country, not every region, but in most regions of the country, consumers typically have one or two options for high-speed internet. That's been something that folks like Susan Crawford have been pointing out for years, and but basically most people can choose between their local cable provider and their local telephone company, and often the telephone company isn't even really competitive with the cable provider from a speed perspective. So that's sort of the AT&T Comcast duopoly issue. It's not so much that there are 5 or 6 big companies slugging it out nationwide, but in any given market there's usually only 1 or 2. And it's just it begs the question of like, well, if a customer is unhappy with their service, what can they do? And the answer is really not much. They can't really vote with their wallet because there's nowhere else to go. And that's one of the things I think that really, again, this infrastructure is expensive. It's understandable that there wouldn't be that many players in the field, but at the end of the day, we need more because until we have more, we're not going to get any kind of meaningful innovation in that space. And the innovation that we are seeing has been driven largely by financial markets. They're the ones pushing for lower latency and faster speeds in the really massive way because they want to get to the market faster than their competitor, and they want to be able to trade faster between India and the U.S. or between London and the U.S. And so that's been really great. That's carried us this far, but I think until consumers start to get wound up about where their internet comes from and how fast it is and understand the benefits that higher speeds bring, we're not going to see a whole lot of change in the structure of the marketplace.
Okay. This does sort of come back to what Michael had said earlier about Title I versus Title II. Really, by making your internet service something that falls under information services under Title I, what that does is it makes it such that they don't have to share their infrastructure lines. So a third party can't provide service on lines owned by any particular company. And essentially what your telecommunications infrastructure, it's a natural monopoly. It doesn't make sense given the cost of what it takes to lay new lines for another company to come in and lay lines into a neighborhood where there already are lines. I mean, that's, there's no guarantee that they're going to get people to switch their service, and it takes a tremendous amount of investment to put that infrastructure in place. So, with a natural monopoly, it doesn't make sense for a company that's not required to share their lines to share it. I mean, at the end of the day, they need to do what's best for them. So, that it makes total sense that any one of these companies would be, keeping their, a tight hold on their infrastructure. But at the end of the day, it puts people on the consumer end of the market in a place where, as Michael said, you can't vote with your wallet. There's nowhere to go if you're not happy with your service. And, as we look sort of across the globe, the long-term opportunity cost of that is, as we, start to slide down the digital divide, what are other countries, other, people going to be able to do with their infrastructure that we can't, because we're finding the quality of our service, whether you're looking at it in terms of bit rate or adoption rate or whatever the metric is that you use to determine the quality of the national broadband service. I mean, however you define that, we run the risk of falling behind in terms of the innovation that's really the sum end of what that value is.
We've also seen in some municipalities and communities where they've tried to take matters into their own hands when you haven't had cable companies or telephone companies investing in the infrastructure in their communities. They've tried to create municipal networks that are being funded by taxpayers, where they've voted on it, they've passed it, and they've tried to build it out. And now we have something like 19 states that have made it that have outlawed the right for municipal networks to compete with the incumbents, with the cable companies and the telephone companies. So even in certain situations where you have local players, communities wanting to create a high-speed access point for their citizens, they've come up against state legislatures who have made it essentially illegal.
Okay, so one question that I have that kind of plays off of that is, wasn't PG&E at one point owned and then turned over to the government and regulated by the government now?
Wait, PG&E, like Pacific Gas and Electric?
In terms of power, the power lines and everything.
Right.
The same
Yeah.
idea.
It's a similar idea. I think, it's hard. That's actually a tough question. I don't know the comparison all that well, but my understanding is that, basically a lot of these companies have gotten really great subsidies from local municipalities, what have you. This goes for power, and this goes for telecom, and this is how it should be. I mean, they've gotten subsidies from localities, from municipalities to build infrastructure. They've gotten a break on licensing fees. They've gotten a break on franchise fees. They've gotten, access and right-of-way and stuff, and that's all really important. We need to do that. Like, local governments have to provide that access for companies to come in and build their infrastructure. But that's become its own barrier that a lot of these big companies are using to prevent new players in the market. So, I mean, in that regard, I don't know, Tim, to address your question, I don't know the specifics of Pacific Gas and Electric. I do know that Pacific Gas and Electric, probably for the most part, is the only utility in your area or in certain parts of California. And the reason for that is because they have the right-of-way. They own the poles. They own the underground conduits that allow them to get electricity from their substations to people's homes, and that they were granted those exclusive rights to those at a time when they were the only operator in the market for whatever reason. And now it's much harder for other power companies, just like it's much harder for other telecom companies to move into the market because they don't have access to those poles and those conduits. And it's this overbuilding thing too. It gets back to what Cameron said. These kinds of infrastructure projects are natural monopolies to a degree. They really, it's inefficient to have 7 different people all digging trenches to your house. just so that you can have multiple options for internet. But at the end of the day, it's got to be a balance between. There needs to be balance between making sure that we're not overbuilding and that we're not spending a lot of money putting new holes in the ground, but that at the same time, the marketplace is not singular the way that it currently is, with a single entity that basically owns access to consumers.
The other facet to that, Michael hit the word utility, which is, kind of a key thing. We've asked a number of people whether or not, broadband should be looked at as a utility, where, you look at gas and electric, and in order to get a CO, a certificate of occupancy, your house, your apartment, whatever, has to have certain things, so you have to have electric, you have to have running water, you have to have X, Y, and Z things to meet the city mandates, right? Broadband is not one of those, and beyond that, even the term broadband is, or your internet connectivity, is a very, very vague definition. It depends on whose data you're reading and what their definition of broadband is, right? So it's not as clear cut as, this is the kind of, service like gas where you have it, it works, you can turn on your stove. It's not that way. So, the question of the correlation between something like, PSE&G or whatever, it's apples and oranges to a degree, because there aren't the same kinds of requirements for, your internet service to be, livable.
Okay. Did any of you else have anything to say? We're kind of getting close over time a little bit. I do have one last question that we could wrap it up with on a little bit of a lighter note, and do any of you have any stories about a funny or memorable moment that really stands out from production?
Aside from never having internet access?
Yeah.
One of the good stories from production is our first time going to Capitol Hill. We had our second time going to Capitol Hill. We had a couple interviews that day with Congresswoman Blackburn and Congresswoman Eshoo. And as we were trying to walk into the Capitol, the cart that we had the equipment on got flagged by security, and so we ended up shutting down the entryway to, I believe, Rayburn Office Building. And they were very polite, and they did their job extremely well. It was just an inconvenience for all the staffers there, as because our cart had been used by the owner to fertilize his garden, and that's what flagged.
The fertilizer set off the hazardous materials alarm. Yeah. But we ended up getting cleared and getting those interviews, so we ended up being fine. But it was just a very unique situation to be in. The lesson learned is it pays to be early.
Yeah.
And it pays to clean the cart.
Yeah. Right.
You never know what's on there. All right. Well, so this is the first event of this Fight for Your Net Right online hangout episodes, and next month we're going to be doing another one with Susan Crawford on September 19th at 8 p.m. So if you guys want to give a little introduction or a little bio about Susan and who she is and why you decided to have her as part of the film.
So there are many ways to describe Susan. She is a woman with many titles. She is the recent author of the book Captive Audience. She worked for President Obama with his transition team for science and technology. She is a professor at
Cardozo.
The Cardozo Institute. I'm trying to think. She's a fellow at the Roosevelt Institute and the Berkman Center.
She's got a lot of titles going on there, huh?
She's very active in internet policy. She's very, very active in telecommunications policy in particular. And she's a very knowledgeable lady. We were lucky enough to sit down with her last summer and ask her, her take on the current state of affairs, her opinion of infrastructure and the marketplace for infrastructure in the United States. And she had some really great answers for us. And so we're looking forward to chatting with her next time about kind of how things have changed, whether things have changed, where she sees things going, her take perhaps on the new head of the FCC, all these things.
She's also a professor that, sort of lends, it lends her to being, and she's very good at explaining some of these more complex issues in a way that, can be understood. That's one of the challenges that we've sort of, been very aware of from the beginning, is that it's very easy for these issues to get, complex and convoluted, and, you can get all wrapped up in, Title I. It's one of those things where it can be very heady. And we've made a point of trying to make, to get at the bottom line in a way that people can understand, because I'm not a lawyer, So it's very, Susan is fantastic at sort of explaining a lot of these issues in a way that, most people can access, and that will be something that we'll have the privilege of seeing next time. So.
Great. So again, just to repeat that, everyone can join us on September 19th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time here. Again, if you want to stay up to date and know, you can register for the War for the Web newsletter at warfortheweb.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, here on Google Plus as well. So, and stay up to date, and we'll definitely keep you updated, and we'll send out all the information as it comes along. So. Thanks very much, guys. It's been great talking with you.
Thanks, guys.
Did you guys want to give any last-minute shout-outs? All right.
No, I think. Well, I'm okay. I'm on.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.